The massive space station hung in the darkness like a metal city, its lights twinkling against the black void. Kepler Prime Station was the pride of the Galactic Federation, a place where dozens of alien species came together to make decisions that affected billions of lives across 12-star systems. Today, the station buzzed with nervous energy as delegates hurried through its corridors. Ambassador John Carter walked slowly through the main hall, his footsteps echoing on the polished metal floor. He had made this walk hundreds of times over the past 20 years, but today felt different. The weight of the message from Earth Command pressed against his chest pocket like a burning coal. 300 years of human membership in the Federation might end today, and the responsibility for that decision rested on his shoulders. The other delegates barely acknowledged his presence as he passed. The tall, blue-skinned Zephyrians moved in their usual groups, their crystal headpieces catching the light as they whispered among themselves. The rock-like Nexari stood motionless in the corners, their glowing eyes tracking every movement in the hall. The slug-like Morvani left trails of slime as they slithered between conversations, their multiple eyes blinking in patterns that Carter had learned to recognize as smugness. "Ambassador Carter," called out Delegate Dexara, one of the younger Zephyrians, "we trust humanity will provide the shield technology we discussed. The Void Walker threat grows stronger each day." Carter nodded politely but said nothing. The Void Walkers were ancient machines that had appeared from the edge of the galaxy 6 months ago, consuming everything in their path. They had already destroyed 3 star systems, turning planets into dust and stars into empty space. The Federation had tried everything to stop them, but only human technology seemed to slow their advance. The assembly hall was a vast circular chamber with seats arranged in tiers that rose toward the domed ceiling. Each species had their section, marked by flags and symbols that told the story of their membership. The human section was small, just 50 seats in a galaxy where some species held hundreds. It had never bothered Carter before, but today the inequality felt like an insult. Chancellor Vexthara called the session to order, her voice booming through the hall's speakers. She was a Morvani, her slug-like body stretched across a platform that lifted her above the other delegates. Her 4 eyes moved independently as she surveyed the assembly, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had led the Federation for over a century. "We gather today to address the growing threat from the Outer Rim," she began, her words translated into dozens of languages by the station's computers. "The Void Walkers have consumed the Altair system and are moving toward the core worlds. We must act quickly to preserve our civilization." Delegate Korth of the Zephyrians stood to speak first. "The Zephyrian Council has prepared a defense plan. We will establish a barrier at the edge of the middle ring, using our fastest ships to delay the enemy while our worlds prepare for evacuation." A rumble of approval came from the Zephyrian section. Carter noticed that their plan involved no actual fighting, just running away and hoping someone else would solve the problem. It was typical of their approach to galactic crises. "The Nexari propose a different strategy," announced Delegate Thorne, his rock-like face showing no emotion. "We will sacrifice the outer colonies to buy time for the core worlds. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." Carter felt his jaw tighten. The outer colonies were mostly human settlements, built by families who had spent generations turning barren worlds into homes. The Nexari were casually discussing abandoning millions of human civilians as if they were chess pieces rather than living beings. "Both plans have merit," Chancellor Vexthara said, her multiple eyes focusing on different parts of the assembly. "However, we need the human shield technology to make either strategy work." "Ambassador Carter, what can humanity contribute to our defense?" Carter stood slowly, feeling the weight of thousands of years of human history on his shoulders. His people had always been the ones to step forward when others stepped back. They had fought wars for species that barely acknowledged their existence. They had died on alien worlds to protect civilizations that saw them as useful but inferior. Humanity has developed quantum barrier technology that can disrupt the Void Walker's energy absorption, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Our battle fleets are ready to engage the enemy directly, as we have done in every previous crisis the Federation has faced. Excellent, Delegate Korath said quickly. We propose that human forces take the lead in the first engagement while our ships provide support from a safe distance. The Nexari agree, Delegate Thorne added. Human casualties in the initial battle will provide valuable data for the rest of our forces. Carter felt something cold settle in his stomach. They were not talking about strategy or tactics. They were talking about using human soldiers as test subjects, sending them to die so the other species could learn from their deaths. The human battle plans will need approval from this assembly, Chancellor Vexthara continued. We cannot have them acting independently in such a crucial situation. Of course, Delegate Korath agreed. Humans are brave, but they lack the wisdom. That comes with age. They need guidance from species with more experience in galactic affairs. Laughter rippled through the assembly, not cruel but casual, as if the idea that humans might have valuable opinions was mildly amusing rather than reasonable. Carter had heard this laughter before at countless meetings where human innovations were adopted while human voices were dismissed. We should also discuss mining rights in the asteroid rings, Delegate Thorne announced. The Nexari claim those regions by right of discovery. The rings were mapped by human survey teams, Carter sighed quietly. Human miners have worked there for 50 years. But the Nexari discovered their true value, Thorne replied. Possession without understanding is meaningless. More laughter, this time louder. The message was clear: humans might do the work, but they were not smart enough to understand what they had found. Others would make the important decisions about how their discoveries should be used. Chancellor Vexthara's eyes fixed on Carter with something that might have been amusement. Ambassador Carter, surely you understand that humanity's role in the Federation is to serve the greater good. You are a young species, barely 300 years in space. You should be grateful for the privilege of serving alongside civilizations that have existed for millennia. The words hit Carter like a physical blow, grateful for the privilege of serving. As if 3 centuries of human sacrifice meant nothing. As if the millions of human lives lost protecting alien worlds were just the price of admission to a club that would never truly accept them as equals. Humanity has always been eager to prove itself, the Chancellor continued, and now Carter could hear the condescension in her voice. That enthusiasm is admirable, but it must be guided by wisdom. The Federation has survived for 1,000 years because we understand the importance of hierarchy and order. The assembly erupted in applause, delegates from every species showing their approval for the Chancellor's words. Carter stood in the middle of it, surrounded by the sound of beings who saw his people as nothing more than useful tools. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the sealed message from Earth Command. He had hoped he would not need to open it, had hoped that this meeting would be different from all the others. But as he broke the seal and read the words that had been written by the leaders of his world, he felt a strange sense of relief. The message was simple. If they see us as servants, remind them that servants can choose their masters. Carter folded the paper carefully and put it back in his pocket. Then he gathered his documents and stood up from his seat. The motion was simple, but somehow it drew the attention of the entire assembly. The applause faded as thousands of alien eyes turned toward the small human section. For 300 years, Carter said, his voice calm and clear, humanity has bled for this Federation. We have died for species who see us as nothing more than useful tools. Today that ends. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Chancellor Vexthara's multiple eyes focused on Carter with what might have been surprise. As if the idea that he might object to her words had never occurred to her, Carter began walking toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. As he reached the massive doors that led out of the assembly hall, he turned back one final time to face the thousands of delegates, who had spent so many years taking humanity's sacrifices for granted. Earth formally withdraws from the Galactic Federation, effective immediately, he announced. We will honor our existing trade contracts through their completion, then sever all diplomatic ties. Good luck with the Void Walkers. The doors sealed behind him with a sound that seemed to echo through the galaxy itself, leaving the assembly in stunned silence as they began to understand what they had just lost. 2 months had passed since Ambassador Carter walked out of the Federation Assembly, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity had meant every word. Admiral Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the transport ship New Horizon, watching as the last group of human civilians boarded from the mining station below. The station had been their home for 30 years, but now it was time to leave. "That's the last shuttle, Admiral," reported Captain Bobby Walsh from the communications station. "All human personnel are aboard." "Good," Grant replied, her eyes fixed on the view screen that showed the mining station growing smaller as they pulled away. "Signal the demolition team. Bring it down." A series of bright flashes lit up the darkness as explosive charges destroyed the station that had provided rare metals to the Federation for 3 decades. The humans had built it, operated it, and now they were ensuring that no one else could benefit from their work. The message was clear: if humanity was not welcome as partners, their contributions would leave with them. Similar scenes played out across Federation space as the Great Withdrawal continued. Every human outpost, every research station, every trading post was either evacuated or destroyed. The process was methodical and thorough, carried out by people who had spent their lives building these places. But now watch them disappear without showing any emotion. Dr. Patricia Williams supervised the evacuation of research Station Alpha 7, where human scientists had been working on quantum barrier technology for 5 years. The research could have saved billions of lives in the war against the Void Walkers, but the Federation had made it clear that human knowledge was valuable while human voices were not. "Doctor, the data cores are ready for transport," said her assistant, Dr. Nancy Foster. "Should we leave copies for the Federation?" Williams looked at the massive computers that contained years of breakthrough research. The quantum barriers could stop the Void Walkers, but they represented something more important than military technology. They were proof that human minds could solve problems that had stumped the older species for centuries. "Destroy everything," Williams said quietly. "If they want our discoveries, they can start by treating us as equals." The research station exploded in a brilliant flash of light, taking with it humanity's greatest scientific achievement. Williams watched from her shuttle as the debris scattered into space, each piece carrying away years of hard work that would now benefit no one. General Marcus Stone led the withdrawal of human military forces from the integrated defense fleets that had protected Federation borders for decades. His Third Fleet had fought alongside alien allies in dozens of conflicts, earning respect through blood and sacrifice. Now those same allies were learning what it meant to face threats without human support. "General, the Zephyrian command is requesting that we delay our departure," reported Colonel Lisa Brown from the communications center. "They say the defense grid cannot function without our ships." Stone looked at the tactical display that showed Federation space spread out before him. Red markers indicated Void Walker activity moving steadily toward the core worlds. The Federation forces were falling back on all fronts, unable to stop an enemy that human tactics had been containing for months. "Tell them we have our orders," Stone replied. "We are no longer part of their military structure." The Third Fleet began its journey home, leaving behind defensive positions that had held the line against every threat the galaxy had thrown at them. As they departed, automated systems began shutting down the sensor networks and communication relays that had kept the Federation's military forces coordinated across vast distances. Dr. Helen Brooks commanded the evacuation of the Titan research facility, where human engineers had been developing new shield generators that could protect entire planets from Void Walker attacks. The technology was almost ready for deployment, but it would disappear along with its creators. "Captain, we're receiving multiple emergency signals from Federation Command," her communications officer reported. "They're offering to triple our research funding if we stay." Brooks smiled grimly as she watched the last shuttle dock with her ship. The offer was meaningless because it missed the point entirely. Humans had never been motivated by money or resources. They had been motivated by respect and partnership, things the Federation had never been willing to provide. "Send a reply," Brooks ordered. "Tell them that some things cannot be bought." The Titan facility exploded as Brooks' ship reached a safe distance, its destruction visible from 6 star systems away. The brightness of the explosion seemed to symbolize the end of an era when human innovation had been freely shared with species that had never appreciated its true cost. The Federation's initial response was anger and threats. Zephyrian diplomats demanded that humanity honor their obligations to the Alliance. Nexari trade representatives threatened economic sanctions against human colonies. Morvani officials dismissed the withdrawal as a temporary tantrum that would soon pass when humans realized they needed the Federation more than it needed them. But as weeks turned to months, a different emotion began to replace their anger. The trading posts that had served as neutral ground for interspecies commerce stood empty and dark. The defense grids that had protected dozens of worlds went offline as their human-designed systems failed without proper maintenance. The research facilities that had produced breakthrough technologies fell silent as their creators disappeared into the void. Kevin Hayes directed the shutdown of the Sol System Defense Network, the massive array of sensors and weapons platforms that had protected not just Earth but served as an early warning system for threats throughout the inner galaxy. The network had taken 50 years to build and represented the finest example of human military engineering. "Sir, we're getting desperate messages from 23 star systems," reported his aide, Lieutenant Amy Peterson. "They're losing deep space monitoring capability as our sensors go offline." Hayes watched as the status lights on his control panel changed from green to red, each one representing a crucial sensor station going dark. The inner galaxy was becoming blind, losing the ability to detect threats before they arrived at populated worlds. "Let them build their own networks," Hayes said calmly. "They wanted independence from human influence. Now they have it." The Federation tried to replace human capabilities through their own resources, but the results were disastrous. Zephyrian attempts to replicate human shield technology resulted in power failures that left 3 colonies without energy for months. Nexari efforts to take over human trade routes led to economic chaos as their rigid protocols could not adapt to the complex market dynamics that humans had navigated through experience and intuition. Most disturbing of all, the Voidwalkers seemed to sense the change in the galaxy's defenses. Their attacks became bolder and more frequent, striking at targets that had been safe behind human-designed barriers just months before. Systems that had been protected for decades suddenly found themselves vulnerable to an enemy they did not understand. Captain Ryan Murphy piloted the last human merchant vessel out of Federation space, his ship loaded with refugees from the outer colonies. These were families who had spent generations building lives on alien worlds, only to pack up everything they owned when their government decided that dignity was more important than comfort. "Captain, we're being hailed by a Federation patrol," his navigator announced. "They want to inspect our cargo." Murphy looked at the families crowded into his ship's cargo bays, people who had given up their homes rather than live under a government that saw them as second-class citizens. Children who had been born on alien worlds were now traveling to an Earth they had never seen, carried by parents who believed that freedom was worth any sacrifice. "Tell them we are no longer subject to Federation authority," Murphy replied. "We are going home." As his ship crossed the invisible line that marked the edge of Federation space, Murphy activated his communication system one final time. His message would be broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy, a simple statement that carried the weight of 3 centuries of disappointment. "You wanted us gone," he said. "Congratulations." Behind them, the lights of Federation space grew dimmer as human influence disappeared from a galaxy that had never appreciated what it was losing. The Great Withdrawal was nearly complete, and the universe was about to discover what it meant to face its problems without the species that had always stepped forward when others stepped back. The silence that followed humanity's departure was more frightening than any threat they had ever posed as allies. 6 months after the last human ship disappeared from Federation space, the effects of their absence spread across the galaxy like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Director Kevin Hayes stood in the control room of Luna Base, watching the final shutdown sequence of the Sol System Defense Network. The massive screens that had once displayed threat assessments from across 23 star systems now showed only empty static. "All outer sensors are offline, Director," reported Technician Carol Wright, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were dismantling. "The inner galaxy is officially blind." Hayes nodded as he watched the last connection severed. The network had taken half a century to build and had saved countless lives by providing early warning of asteroid impacts, solar flares, and hostile forces. Now it was gone, leaving the Federation to face an increasingly dangerous universe without their electronic eyes and ears. The Federation Council had sent 17 different diplomatic missions to the edge of human space, each one more desperate than the last. They offered trade concessions, territorial rights, and even voting equality that they had denied for 3 centuries. But the messages disappeared into the silence beyond the Terran exclusion zone, answered only by the steady pulse of automated beacons that warned all ships to stay away. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades began to collapse as the systems humanity had designed failed without proper maintenance. The elegant navigation networks that guided ships safely through asteroid fields and stellar debris required constant updates that only human engineers fully understood. Without those updates, shipping became dangerous and expensive as vessels were forced to take longer, safer paths between star systems. Captain Sandra Mitchell commanded the Federation supply ship Harmony's dream on what should have been a routine cargo run between the Nexari homeworld and their mining colonies. The journey that once took 3 days now required 2 weeks as they navigated around hazards that the human-built early warning system would have detected automatically. "Captain, we're picking up another distress signal," her communications officer reported. "That's the 4th ship this week requesting emergency navigation assistance." Mitchell looked at her star charts, noting the red zones that marked areas where ships had been lost since the human navigation network went offline. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place to travel as captains were forced to rely on outdated maps and their own limited sensor ranges. "Send them our backup navigation data," Mitchell ordered, knowing it would help but not solve their problems. "And add another warning buoy to our deployment list." The Federation had tried to replace human systems with their own technology, but the results were catastrophic. The Zephyrian attempt to create quantum shields resulted in 3 colonies losing power when the untested technology overloaded their electrical grids. Families froze in the darkness while Zephyrian engineers struggled to understand the principles that human scientists had mastered years earlier. The Nexari took control of the asteroid mining operations that humans had abandoned, confident that their superior logic would improve efficiency. Within 2 months, production dropped by 70% as their rigid procedures could not adapt to the changing conditions that human miners had handled through experience and intuition. Worse, their inflexible safety protocols led to accidents that killed dozens of workers who had trusted alien expertise over human knowledge. Dr. Frank Peterson monitored the situation from Earth's Deep Space Communications Center, listening to the increasingly desperate transmissions from Federation space. His job had once been to coordinate research projects with alien scientists, but now he simply recorded their distress calls for the historical archive. "Doctor, we're receiving another emergency broadcast from the Vega Science Station," his assistant informed him. "They're requesting immediate assistance with a reactor containment failure." Peterson looked at the technical specifications attached to the message and immediately recognized the problem. It was a simple fix that any human engineer could handle in minutes, but the alien crew was following procedures that would take days and might result in a catastrophic explosion. "File it with the others," Peterson said quietly, "and send our standard response." The standard response was always the same. The Terran government regrets that it cannot provide assistance to non-allied worlds. It was polite, professional, and final. There would be no exceptions and no emergency aid for the Federation that had dismissed human contributions for so long. The Void Walker attacks became bolder as the mechanical invaders sensed the weakness in the galaxy's defenses. Systems that had been safe behind human-designed barriers suddenly found themselves exposed to an enemy they did not understand. The creatures consumed energy and matter indiscriminately, turning thriving worlds into empty space as they advanced. Toward the core systems, Admiral Tony Clark led the Federation's Third Defensive Fleet in a desperate attempt to stop the Voidwalker advance at the Centauri system. His mixed force of alien ships tried to implement the tactics that had worked when humans led similar operations, but the results were disastrous. "Admiral, the Zephyrian squadron is breaking formation," his tactical officer reported. "They say our attack pattern is too aggressive." Clark watched helplessly as his carefully planned assault fell apart. The Zephyrians had always been cautious fighters, preferring to retreat and regroup rather than press an advantage. The Nexari moved too slowly, their decision-making process requiring consensus that took precious minutes to achieve. The Morvani refused to take orders from anyone, believing their ancient wisdom was superior to modern military doctrine. "Order all ships to withdraw," Clark commanded as Voidwalker energy beams tore through his formation. "We cannot hold this position." The Centauri system fell within hours, its 6 billion inhabitants disappearing as the Voidwalkers converted matter into energy for their incomprehensible purposes. It was the 15th system lost since humanity withdrew from the galaxy, and the defeats were coming faster as Federation forces proved unable to adapt to their enemy's tactics. Meanwhile, long-range sensors detected massive construction projects within the Terran exclusion zone. Huge shipyards appeared around Earth's moon, while mysterious structures grew on Mars and the outer planets. The scale of the building suggested that humanity was preparing for something, but no communication came from within the zone to explain their intentions. Engineer Paul Davis worked on the expansion of the Titan shipyards, one of dozens of massive construction projects that had begun the moment humanity sealed their borders. The facility would eventually produce exploration ships designed to travel beyond the galaxy, leaving behind the political problems that had made the Federation uninhabitable. For species that value dignity over convenience. "Paul, we're ahead of schedule on the deep space modules," his supervisor informed him. "Earth Command wants to accelerate the timeline for the first launch." Davis looked out at the construction zone where hundreds of workers assembled components for ships that would carry humanity to distant galaxies where they could build something better than the Federation. The work was hard but satisfying, driven by the knowledge that they were creating their own future rather than serving the ambitions of others. The Federation's attempts to contact humanity grew more desperate as their situation deteriorated. They offered complete political submission, promising to restructure their entire government to give humans equal representation. They offered their most advanced technologies, their richest territories, even their sacred religious artifacts as payment for forgiveness, but the Terran exclusion zone remained silent, its borders patrolled by automated defense platforms that destroyed any ship that came too close. Humanity had learned the lesson the Federation taught them so well, that some relationships were too damaged to repair, and some bridges were best left burned. The galaxy was learning to live without the species that had always stepped forward when others stepped back. It was a harder lesson than anyone expected, and the price was measured in empty star systems and the growing silence where human voices had once offered hope and solutions to problems that seemed impossible to solve. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy faced its darkest hour as the Voidwalker invasion reached the core systems of Federation space. Commander Alex Turner stood in the observation deck of Fortress Luna, watching the distant stars through reinforced windows while monitoring reports from the collapsing civilization beyond human borders. "Commander, we're receiving another transmission from the Federation Emergency Council," reported Lieutenant Danny Foster from the communications station. "They're offering complete surrender of all political authority to human leadership." Turner read the desperate message on his display screen, noting the trembling signatures of alien leaders who had once dismissed humanity as too young and inexperienced for important decisions. The same Chancellor Vexthara, who had spoken of the privilege of serving, now begged for human intervention to save her dying civilization. "File it with the others," Turner said calmly, and maintain communication silence. The reports coming from Federation space painted a picture of complete collapse. The Kepler defense grid, once considered the most powerful military installation in the galaxy, had fallen in 3 days when Voidwalkers overwhelmed defenses that had never been properly maintained after human engineers departed. The crystalline cities of the Nexari homeworld went dark as the mechanical invaders consumed their power sources, leaving billions to face slow death in the cold depths of space. Dr. Sandra Mitchell monitored the situation from Earth's Xenological Research Center, her instruments tracking the steady destruction of worlds that had once been proud members of an interstellar alliance. Her job was to observe and record, not to feel sympathy for civilizations that had brought destruction upon themselves through arrogance and ingratitude. "Doctor, the Zephyrian fleet suffered another major defeat at the Rigel system," her assistant reported. "They lost 60% of their ships trying to implement human battle tactics without understanding the underlying strategy." Mitchell nodded as she updated her records. The Zephyrians had always been followers rather than leaders, depending on human tactical coordination to make their natural caution effective in battle. Without that guidance, their fleets fell apart when faced with an enemy that required aggressive action and split-second decision-making. The proud Zephyrian military, once supported by human strategic planning and maintenance expertise, suffered devastating losses in every engagement. Their ships broke down from lack of proper care, while their commanders made tactical errors that human advisors had prevented for decades. The species that had held 3 votes in the Federation Council now faced extinction as their scattered survivors fled toward the galactic rim. General Robert Hayes commanded what remained of the Federation's military forces from a hidden base in the asteroid belt, trying to coordinate a defense with resources that dwindled daily. His mixed force of alien ships had been reduced to hit-and-run attacks that barely slowed the Voidwalker advance. "General, the Morvani delegation is refusing to follow the evacuation plan," his aide informed him. "They claim their ancient wisdom makes them immune to the Voidwalker threat." Hayes looked at the tactical display showing Voidwalker forces moving steadily toward the Morvani homeworld. The slug-like creatures who had ruled the Federation for centuries still believed their age and experience made them superior to younger species, even as their civilization crumbled around them. "Let them learn the hard way," Hayes said grimly. "We have more important battles to fight." The Morvani homeworld fell within a week, its billion-year-old cities reduced to cosmic dust as the Voidwalkers consumed everything they had built. The species that had spoken of hierarchy and proper order disappeared into the darkness, their ancient wisdom proving worthless against an enemy that cared nothing for tradition or authority. Desperate, Federation delegations continued to arrive at the edge of human space, broadcasting increasingly frantic pleas for assistance. They offered territorial concessions that would give humanity control of half the galaxy. They promised access to their most sacred technologies and religious artifacts. Some even offered complete cultural assimilation, agreeing to abandon their own ways of life in exchange for human protection. Captain Lisa Brown led one of the human patrol ships that monitored the exclusion zone boundary, watching Federation vessels approach the invisible line that marked the edge of human territory. Her orders were clear: observe, record, and maintain the barrier that kept 2 civilizations apart. "Captain, the incoming ship is broadcasting on all frequencies," her communications officer reported. "They claim to have the last survivors from the Vega colonies aboard." Brown looked at her sensors, which showed a damaged Federation transport limping toward human space with thousands of refugees crowded into its cargo holds. The ship's life support was failing, and it would not survive much longer without immediate assistance. "Transmit our standard response," Brown ordered. "Remind them that the exclusion zone boundary cannot be crossed." The standard response had not changed in a year, The Terran government regrets that it cannot provide assistance to non-allied worlds. It was the same polite but final message that had been sent to hundreds of desperate ships. Maintaining the isolation that humanity had chosen when the Federation made their position clear, the refugee ship turned away from human space, its passengers, facing certain death rather than violating the boundary that had become more absolute than any physical barrier. Brown watched it disappear into the darkness, carrying with it the hopes of families who had learned too late the value of the species they had rejected. Inside the Terran exclusion zone, humanity worked on projects that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. Massive shipyards around Jupiter constructed vessels designed for journeys that would take centuries, while research stations on the outer planets developed technologies that would allow human civilization to spread beyond the galaxy itself. Engineer Carol Wright supervised the construction of the deep space exploration ship Endeavour, a vessel larger than most Federation space stations and equipped with everything needed to establish colonies in distant galaxies. The ship represented humanity's future, independent, self-sufficient, and free from the political constraints that had limited their potential for so long. Carol, Earth Command is asking for a progress report on the stellar cartography systems. Her assistant informed her. They want to know if we can map potential destinations beyond the galactic rim. Wright looked at the star charts that showed not just their local galaxy, but the vast empty spaces between galactic clusters where humanity might build something entirely new. The universe was larger than the Federation had ever imagined, and most of it remained unexplored by species too comfortable with their existing territories to seek new horizons. Tell them we'll be ready for the first long-range survey mission within 6 months, Wright replied. And remind them that we're not just planning one colony ship, we're planning 1,000. The Federation continued to collapse as Voidwalker forces reached the inner systems where the oldest civilizations had built their capitals. 7 star systems had been completely consumed, with 12 more under direct attack. The military response grew weaker with each passing day as alien commanders proved unable to coordinate effective resistance without human leadership. The galaxy began to understand a truth that chilled every surviving world. Humanity was not coming back. The species that had always stepped forward to solve everyone else's problems had finally learned to put their own interests first. They were not hiding behind their borders waiting for the right moment to return as saviors. They were preparing to leave entirely, taking their knowledge and capabilities to places where they would be appreciated rather than taken for granted. The messages from Federation space grew more desperate as their situation became hopeless. They no longer offered deals or negotiations. They simply begged, their transmissions carrying the voices of beings who had realized too late what they had lost when they drove away the only species that had ever fought for them, without demanding anything in return but the Terran exclusion zone remained silent, its automated defenses destroying any ship that tried to cross the boundary. Humanity had chosen their path, and it led away from a galaxy that had never learned to value what it had until it was gone forever. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the galactic table, and the universe had become a very different place. Lieutenant Colonel Ashley Davis led a human patrol along the border of the exclusion zone, monitoring the wreckage of what was once a thriving interstellar civilization. Her reports back to Earth Command were clinical and detached, describing the situation with the same professional distance they might use for any natural disaster occurring in a distant part of the galaxy. The Voidwalker War had ended not with victory but with exhaustion. The mechanical invaders had consumed half the Federation's member worlds before simply disappearing back into the space between galaxies, leaving behind empty systems where billions of beings had once lived. The survivors existed in small, isolated pockets, having learned too late the value of the species they had driven away. "Colonel, we're detecting another refugee convoy approaching the boundary," reported Sergeant Mike Johnson from his sensor station. "Looks like Nexari survivors from the outer colonies." Davis looked at her tactical display, which showed a small group of damaged ships limping toward human space. The vessels were overcrowded with families who had lost everything when their Worlds were consumed, and their life support systems were failing. In the old days, human rescue ships would have crossed any border to save lives, but those days were gone forever. "Transmit the standard humanitarian package," Davis ordered. "Medical supplies, food, and basic repair materials. Then escort them back to the boundary." The humanitarian aid was delivered by automated drones that crossed the invisible line for just long enough to transfer supplies to the refugee ships. The help was real and potentially life-saving, but it came with no invitation to enter human space and no offer of permanent sanctuary. Humanity had learned to help without becoming involved. The Federation itself had collapsed within 3 years of humanity's departure. Without human diplomatic skills to bridge the gap between radically different alien mindsets, old prejudices and territorial disputes had erupted into open warfare. The Zephyr-Nixari conflict had claimed more lives than the Void Walker invasion, while the surviving Morvani had retreated into isolationist shells, trusting no one and sharing nothing. Dr. Patricia Williams worked in the New Geneva Research Complex on Mars, leading humanity's most ambitious scientific projects in an environment free from political interference. Her team had developed technologies that would have seemed like magic to the Federation scientists who had once dismissed human research as primitive and unimportant. "Doctor, the Stellar Engineering Project is ahead of schedule," her assistant informed her. "We should be ready to begin construction of the first artificial star within 2 years." Williams nodded as she reviewed the plans that would allow human colonies to exist in the empty space between galaxies, creating their own sources of light and energy rather than depending on natural stars that might harbor hostile neighbors. The technology represented a level of advancement that the Federation had never achieved in 1,000 years of existence. The massive construction projects, detected years earlier, had revealed their purpose as humanity prepared for the next phase of their civilization. New Earth orbited Jupiter, an artificial world, 3 times larger than the original and equipped with everything needed to support billions of people during the long journey to distant galaxies. Colony ships the size of small moons were assembled in the asteroid belt, each one capable of carrying entire cities to places where humanity could build without interference. Administrator James Nelson reviewed the strategic situation from his office overlooking the restored Atlantic coastline, where Earth's population had been reduced to a few 100 million people, who chose to remain on the homeworld while others prepared for the great journey ahead. Through his windows, he could see construction ships building another deep space exploration vessel, part of humanity's mission to explore the galaxy beyond the old Federation territories. Administrator, the latest intelligence reports from the former Federation space, his aide announced, placing a datapad on Nelson's desk. "The situation continues to deteriorate." Nelson scanned the reports that described a galaxy in chaos. Pirates raided undefended colonies while warlords carved up the territories that once belonged to mighty civilizations. The ancient trade routes had become highways for bandits and slavers who preyed on refugees fleeing from one disaster to another. Technology was failing throughout the galaxy as complex systems designed by human engineers broke down without proper maintenance. "Any change in their communication attempts?" Nelson asked, though he already knew the answer. "The same pattern, sir. Daily broadcasts offering everything from complete territorial surrender to religious worship of humanity as gods. The desperation is increasing, but the content remains unchanged." The alien transmissions had evolved over the years, from anger to pleading to acceptance, and finally to something approaching wisdom. The latest intercepts contained phrases in dozens of languages that all carried the same meaning. "We understand now. We were wrong. We are sorry." But understanding came too late to repair relationships that had been destroyed by centuries of arrogance and ingratitude. Captain Helen Brooks commanded the exploration ship Horizon's Edge as it conducted surveys beyond the galactic rim, mapping potential colony sites in the vast empty spaces where humanity could build without neighbors who might repeat the mistakes of the Federation. Her crew worked with the enthusiasm of people who knew they were creating the future rather than serving the ambitions of others. "Captain, we've located another suitable galaxy cluster," her science officer reported. 7 spiral galaxies with hundreds of potentially habitable worlds and no signs of advanced civilization. Brooks looked at the star charts that showed their destination, a place where human colonies could grow and develop without political interference or demands for tribute from species who considered themselves superior. The journey would take several centuries even with their most advanced ships, but it would be worth the time to escape the problems that had made the Federation uninhabitable for people who valued dignity over convenience. Back in the ruins of Federation space, the survivors had learned harsh lessons about the nature of dependency and respect. The species that remained alive did so by adapting to a galaxy without human protection, learning to solve their own problems and fight their own battles. Some succeeded and grew stronger, while others failed and disappeared into the darkness that had claimed so many worlds. The messages directed toward human space changed as the years passed, becoming less desperate and more resigned. The latest transmissions spoke of rebuilding and learning, of species that were trying to become what humanity had always been: independent, self-reliant, and capable of standing on their own. Whether they would succeed remained to be seen, but the effort itself represented progress. Nelson filed the daily intelligence report without comment and returned to his work planning the next phase of human expansion into unexplored space. One final alien message arrived as he reviewed the colony ship schedules, addressed simply to our former friends and containing only 2 words in perfect English: "Thank you." The message was different from the usual pleas for help or expressions of regret. It came from a group of young Zephyrians who had survived the collapse and built a small but growing civilization based on the principles they had learned from watching humanity: that respect must be earned, that strength comes from independence, and that the greatest gift is teaching others to stand on their own. Nelson read the message twice before filing it with the others, unread and unanswered by official policy, but not unnoticed by the people who had once tried to help the galaxy become something better. The response, if it came, would not be from Earth Command, but from individuals who remembered what it felt like to have allies rather than masters. As Nelson looked out at the construction ships preparing humanity's journey to distant stars, he knew that the galaxy would survive without them. Some species would learn and grow stronger, while others would repeat the same mistakes that had destroyed the Federation. But that was their choice to make, just as humanity had chosen to walk away from those who did not deserve their loyalty. The table sat empty now, and the galaxy was both smaller and larger for it. Smaller because it had lost the species that always stepped forward when others stepped back, and larger because the remaining civilizations finally had room to become what they were capable of being without depending on others to solve their problems. In the end, the most dangerous thing about humans had not been their capacity for war, but their capacity to walk away from those who did not appreciate what they offered. The galaxy had learned that lesson at a price measured in empty star systems and silent worlds, but perhaps that was the only way such knowledge could be gained.